You're listening to the Launchcast, your favorite podcast on the planet, brought to you by Launchpad 516 Studios with me, your host, George Andriopoulos. We're talking leadership, business, life, and growth right now as the countdown starts.
It's like food for your ears.
At this time, I'm going to ask that you fasten your seatbelts.
Launch sequence.
Launch sequence activated.
Launch sequence activated.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Woo! Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Launchcast. We are 20 episodes into season 3. This is how long I've been doing this. I'm all confused here. Episode 320 today. It's another Launchcast Leadership Profile. This one's called Leadership Through Conscious Communication, a fitting title, and you'll find out why. But some business first. It's the LaunchDad himself, George Andriopoulos, bringing you your favorite podcast on the planet. Leadership, business, life, growth, right now as the beat drops.
Into the black hole.
What is happening, everybody? Another episode of the Launchcast. We are back, and we are excited for another interview. We've been doing a lot of interviews this season, so it's kind of cool to not do some of our soapbox episodes as often. Just talk to leaders about what makes them tick, the journeys along the way. We all know that this is the show about unconventional journeys to leadership. And our guest today, which I'm going to bring on in a minute after we do some business here, our guest today is no exception. Really, really interesting journey. First, thank you guys for continuing to join us. Reminder from Launchpad 516 Studios, the company that makes this whole thing possible, the production company behind behind the Launchcast, behind Sounds Like Autism, behind the Spreading Happiness podcast, all of them. Embrace It, Over My Dad podcast. Now, I'm forgetting all of them, but just a reminder that we have a couple of new shows that are going to be debuting in the coming month. We are so excited about it, so keep your eyes peeled on this channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, check out the Launchpad 516 Studios channel where all of our shows are housed. So, without further ado, I'm going to do the bio, and I'm going to bring our guest on. Our guest today, Jem Fuller. Jem Fuller has lived a colorful global life, from barefoot backpacker to corporate leader, fire dancer, traditional tattooist, kindergarten teacher, motorcycle courier, masseuse, reflexology to laborer, and travel consultant. Now his time is as a partner and father, coach, facilitator, and retreat leader. He is the author of the recently published book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men, and can be seen delivering his TEDx on YouTube. We're going to get into that. Let me bring him on screen, unmute you, and there he is. Hey, Jem. Nice to see you, buddy.
George. Hey, man. How are you?
Doing good, buddy. Doing good. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to dive right in. The Launchcast Leadership Profiles, they're a different type of episode that we just started. This week, the first one launched on Apple Podcast with 319 with Dr. Danny Brissell. A little bit shorter, a little bit more focused on the leadership itself rather than the journey, but we're going to touch on all of it. So I'm going to start with the question that we always start with. Jem, are you a leader?
Yeah, apparently. Apparently. It's interesting, man. You asked that question, and please keep me on track. By the way, I can sometimes get a bit passionate and excited and talk about things. But yeah, look, and especially these days, I'm finding in the space of working with men and helping the brand. When I say the brand of men, I mean the people behind it, and the cultural stereotype of what that is, and helping us evolve that, because I think it's an important piece of work. And I'm finding that people are looking to me as a leader in vulnerability, a leader in authenticity and being alternative. I didn't have the standard path to doing what I do now as an executive coach. But I think it's really important to to embrace all of that and to lead the way, to be open and to share some of the stuff that men usually keep to themselves. There's a lot of that. So yes, I reckon I'm a leader.
Yeah, so I find that so interesting, and maybe we'll touch on the book a little bit before I ask the rest of the question. So, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. In your definition of leadership just now, you talked a lot about being a thoughtful man. This is something that really has been at the forefront of a lot of conversations that I've been having the last few years. I tend to surround myself by like-minded people. And people that are of different mindsets, just to keep it interesting and to make sure that I'm evolving as a person. But I know that in today's times, being thoughtful as a man, being a real man, and that's not the definition that it used to be, is so important for us as men. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about what kind of sparked this book for you and what the ideology is behind that.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, the book initially I started writing about communication. It's such an important and quite often overlooked facet of us as a species. Without communication, we couldn't have even evolved off the savannah plains. We weren't the fastest, fiercest creatures there. We needed to figure out how to socialize and work together in communities, and communication is an essential part of that. And watching the world, at the moment too, George, you would have seen people shouting at each other, across these digital divides of difference, people identifying with their politic or their beliefs to the point of the communication just deteriorating, people cancel culture and all this kind of stuff. And it's upsetting because we need to work together to solve the bigger problems. So that's the communication piece. I started writing the book just generally about that. And then a book writing mentor of mine said to me, Jem, you need to pick an audience. You need to write for someone a bit more specifically. It's too broad. And I'm also really passionate about, evolving, helping men evolve and become, the next iteration of what we are. The old stereotype of suck it up, man up, don't cry like a girl, just get the result, put on a brave face, don't express your emotions, vulnerability is a weakness, all that kind of stuff is outdated and not relevant. We really need to be stepping up. And, the world's changing, where the post-industrial revolution is gone. We need to be more human-centric. We need to be leading our organizations, our communities, with more heart, more sensibility. So anyway, so I started writing it for men. That's how the book started to take shape. And, and it's now really starting to get some traction, and I'm getting emails and reach outs from men and women who've read the book and are thanking me for it and saying it's really giving them some tools to change the way they lead in their own lives, which is good.
Yeah, that's incredible. I want to dive just a little bit further into that. So I know in your bio here it says that you are now a partner and a father. Talk to me about the shift in terms of your, I guess, mindset behind what it is to be a man, and how that changed when you became a father.
Yeah. Look, for me, one of the biggest pieces about this boy to man journey, and it's very individual for anybody on this journey, but one of the pieces of it really is about responsibility and stepping into responsibility, and whatever that looks like for you. That was a big piece of it for me. But we're always evolving into this journey as well, and so when you're a father, all of a sudden, or a parent, any parent, all of a sudden there's these little people that need you and can't survive without you putting food on the table and shelter over their heads and keeping them warm in winter and all the basics. So that was really a wake up, but that was only part of the journey for me. My oldest child, he's not a child anymore, he turned 18 last week, and so it's been a while, and for me, figuring out what it is to be a man, and I'm quote unquote a man, is still happening. I'm still figuring it out now. I've been sitting in men's circle for over 10 years now, and there's a bunch of us that sit around a fire once a month, and we pick a theme, a meaningful theme, and we talk about our experience of that, what it's like for us. So just exploring it, it's a journey, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, and I love that you say that you're kind of still figuring it out, right? And I think that's probably the one trait that every thoughtful man out there should make sure is a part of their mindset. That there's no finite end to this thing, right? It's just you have to keep evolving if you're going to be a man. Because look, at a certain point in time, right? We think a long, long time ago, the hunter gatherers that were bringing food for their family. I mean, they had to be that person, and then the world sort of evolved, but some people were still that person, and they kind of had to evolve into this mindset. Well, things are different now. People can do different things. Let me evolve into a different iteration of what a man should be. And that's, I love that you talk about that, because if I could give one piece of advice to anybody, it's to never think that you've sort of figured it out, right? We talk about here on the show something I like to call the balance phenomenon. Something that for me in my leadership journey, that when I kind of realized that it's never going to be perfect, when I kind of realized that the whole point to achieving balance is the fact that you're going to be unbalanced once in a while, and that you have to sort of skew back to the other side to rebalance things. That's when I was sort of at peace with, being a father, a leader, a husband, to know that, hey, I can make these mistakes. I'm never going to have it figured all out. But as long as I am conscious of where I'm at today, right now, in this very moment, and I can sort of level it back out, then I'm doing my job as a man. So yeah, I love that mindset, Jem. Huge. So I talked in your bio a little bit about your journey, which I've read a little bit more deeper on when I saw your profile when we got matched up as host and guest here. Talk about your journey, and how did you go from barefoot backpacker to corporate leader?
Yeah, it wasn't overnight, but when I did put on the suit and tie, my friends were shaking their heads, looking at me, going, "What are you doing?" Yeah, no, look, it was just an accidental, happening of me. Initially, when I was younger and when I finished high school, I was very anti-establishment. I didn't want to play the game, man. I finished high school and I took off and just, got as far away from where I grew up as possible, moved to the other side of the world, and fell in love with travel, essentially, fell in love with cross-cultural connection. With the benefit of hindsight now, I can look back and understand that this internal drive that I had to really travel and live and immerse myself into very foreign cultures was coming from this place of wanting to connect with humans that were really different to me. I didn't really understand that at the time, but that's what it was. And so that just had me, traveling all around the world. I didn't want to do the normal thing. I didn't want to go to university and get a job and put on a suit and try and earn as much money as possible and have the white picket fence and do that standard thing. That whole thing, really, I just had to get away from. So that had me doing all sorts of different things, man. And one thing leads to another, right? I went from being a punk squatting in abandoned buildings in London, and then the barefoot backpacking thing. I just had my first identity crisis when it all kind of fell apart in my late 20s, and I ended up in India just wandering around trying to find myself. And there I was all the time, right there with myself, but re-identifying. And I was a full hippie, man. I had long dreadlocks and a long beard, and I wanted to live very simply. I wanted to disappear into the fabric of the culture. And so I did that, just by dressing very, very simply and appearing to be poor, and not wearing any shoes, and living outdoors. I was cooking off a fire. I had my pots and pans, and I was living rough. And I successfully disappeared into the fabric of their culture. That the beggars stopped begging from me, and the hawkers stopped trying to sell stuff to me, and I just kind of disappeared, which was great. That's what I wanted to do. And then over the time, it was when I became a dad. When I first became a father, and I was like, wow, I've got to find a way to support these kids. And I didn't know what to do. So I got a job with a travel company, international travel company, as a travel consultant. and hence the shirt and tie. And I had quite a successful chapter with them, and I ended up in senior leadership, corporate leadership with 150 staff and lots of zeros behind the numbers that I was trying to push and grow every month, and the pressure to grow that net profit, quarter on quarter, and so hence the corporate chapter.
Yeah. I guess what I'm wondering is when I hear all these different chapters of your life, barefoot backpacker, fire dancer, traditional tattooist. I guess my question is, what was it about cultures that were different that drew you to getting immersed in them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, man. Sure, there's the drive to connect, which is a very human drive. We all have a drive to connect in some way, shape, or form. For me, the thing about difference, why was I driven to something alternative, something different? I don't know. Maybe you can tell me, man. Can you analyze me? What do you reckon?
I'll say for myself, we all go on completely different journeys, but when we can kind of look back introspectively and look at like the similarities between the journeys, although the journeys were totally different. For me, I remember I went through a whole, and I talk about this a lot on my show. I went through a whole transformation, between my late teens and early 30s, where I went from, eager kid looking for success and kind of thought he knew what he wanted, but didn't really know, and set myself into a career that was okay and didn't really excite me too much. But during that time, the individual George for me was always changing and evolving, and I kind of did this thing where because I didn't know who I was, it was more of an emulation thing. I'm a huge TV and movie buff, right? More of a historian in it now. I'm seeing in my later years now, but I would look at these characters and go like, oh, I want to be that. I want to emulate that. And so it was always taking on these personas for me. And then, as I kind of got older and a little more educated, a little wiser, made some mistakes that led me to certain points in my life. You look at things at a more spiritual level, a little more metaphysical, and you're like, what can I do here to kind of lift myself to get to this next place that I don't know in my head what that next place is, and you immerse yourself in it and you see if it works, right? So I think of it more as like a trial and error thing sometimes. Something excites you, you look at it and you go, yeah, let me give that a shot. These people have been successful in it. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
With cultures, I see, and I've seen on your website pictures of your tattoos. So we have that in common. It seems like you have a proclivity towards tribal tattoos. I'm not sure what culture they're from, but talk about that a little bit, because I have sort of that same thing going on with me.
Yeah. Man, I can talk to that in a sec. As we're analyzing and looking a little bit deeper into why have we, lived the lives that we've lived. There's the other element which plays into this story as well, which is, for me, is the father-son relationship and my relationship with my father, and rebelling and not wanting to be him. And that was quite deep. And I love my father. He's not around anymore. He died, must be 12 years ago now. And I love him and adore him. But at the same time, as a kid, I just did not want to be him.
Yeah.
I had a pretty strained relationship with him. And so I look back now with the benefit of hindsight, retrospectively analyzing why I did a lot of what I did, and I think that was it. It was a big reaction to my relationship with my father, which I've heard speaking to other men. That's quite often there's a theme there, that father-son relationship, and then flipping it now for me as a dad with my two boys, and curious as to how they're turning out. And we try our best, right? We're only trying our best, and my dad was trying his best too. But as little people growing up, we experience things, and there's inevitable trauma, right?
Absolutely.
One way or another, there's going to be stuff that's traumatic for the kid. So I think that played into it as well. The tribal tattoos, man, that's, that was just, it was a design, as much an aesthetic for me. I just love the aesthetic of tribal art, and also, having spent most of my 20s and early 30s living in tribal cultures, immersing myself into cultures. I think that's where it came from. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the cultures and the stories behind them have always fascinated me. I've been into tribal tattoos, specifically Polynesian, for so many years. And funny enough, as a late teenager, I remember, hearing the story of I was a big fan of The Rock, right, the wrestler. And then when he started getting the stuff all over him, the Polynesian tattoos, I remember not only thinking that was cool, but like looking into the culture. And I really became a student of Polynesian culture after that, and was fascinated. And it had nothing to do with Dwayne Johnson anymore. It was more like, wow, like I love the mindset behind these. I love the story behind them, how rich they are in culture. And I started getting, I got a leg sleeve. I started getting something on my arm here. And then I remember, I'm divorced and remarried since. I remember when my now wife and I were talking about our honeymoon when we got married a few years ago. I was like, we have to go to Hawaii. We have to go to Hawaii. We have to hit up a few islands. I need to get tattooed on the island, I organized this whole thing where I had a cover up done at one place, and then we went to a different island, and although I have some really nice Polynesian ink solo stuff, I had some old like 90s tribal, bullshit, right? That means nothing. And I had spoken to this tattooist on Maui, and we worked together for months to kind of rework my existing tattoo. And I remember going there and sitting for like 14 hours straight with this guy, and just leaving there with this big feeling of relief that this thing that I had on myself for so many years that really meant nothing now meant so much to me, because it had been through a journey. It kind of represented these mistakes I made, when I was younger, and he helped me sort of tell a new story over it and whatever. So yeah, I love the story behind these tattoos, and it's definitely not.
I think you've actually spoken to what it is about tattoos that I love as well, and the way that I tattoo is by hand, no machine, old school kind of ... tribal tattooing, and it's because it's about the process, it's about the story, it's about the journey, it's about the ritual.
Yeah.
It's not about, for me, I started after years of traveling around the world and tattooing people as I traveled. That was my means of getting by around the world, and then coming home, and I ended up getting a job in a studio, and I started learning the gun, the tattoo gun, and and then people would come in off the street and say, I want number 23 off the wall, and they want the heart with the arrow through it kind of thing. And I started to go, no, this is not what I love about this beautiful ancient ritual and art form that we've been doing as a process with each other, for tens of thousands of years. So yeah, it's like you said, man, it's the story, it's the journey and the ritual and the process that's the meaningful part behind it.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. And now a word from our sponsors. Well, that's a nice song. Hey, everybody. It's me, the LaunchDad himself, George Andriopoulos, the host of the Launchcast, the co-host of Over My Dad podcast. But more importantly, I'm here today on behalf of Launchpad 516 Studios, the podcast production company that makes those two shows, the one you're listening to now, and so many others possible. Now, what is Launchpad 516 Studios? Well, it's the brainchild of Launchpad 516. It's a podcast production company, and we help you from conceptualization to production to recording to post-production to monetization. The key word here, let's turn that hobby, that idea into a revenue stream. But more importantly, let's get that important idea out there and get your voice heard, because that's what matters right now. Hit us up, launchpad516studios.com to find out more information, or send us an email, podcast@lp516.com. DM me at LaunchPad CEO on all the platforms. Let's chat. Let's get your voice heard. We're pretty good at this, guys. Don't let this offer slip by you. Later, guys.
Beep, beep, beep. We are interrupting this show to tell you about our podcast with a very special announcement.
Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying your podcast, what you're listening to right now. But I would like to tell you about another one.
We are Sounds Like Autism,
Produced by Launchpad 516 Studios.
which is full of impactful programming.
It's the podcast that celebrates neurodiversity by speaking to the people who are helping to create a more inclusive world.
I am Dave Thompson. I am an educator and an innovator and a leader within the space of helping the world become a more inclusive place for neurodivergent people as a neurodivergent self-advocate myself. And my co-host, Josh Mirsky, is an incredible, hardworking, big picture dude who is on the autism spectrum and super stoked to spread his message of inclusion along with me.
We've had folks on from all over, all walks of life, all over the country, and more.
You don't need to be someone who is autistic yourself or have skin in the game. You don't need a family member or a neighbor who is autistic. You probably have one, but you don't need any of that to get stoked on neurodiversity and inclusion. We're confident that if you give us a shot, if you join us on our journey, that you'll be a lifer and you'll be fully invested in this mission. We are just so delighted and honored to have this kind of platform to share with you all what we do. Check us out.
I hope you enjoy your current podcast, and then after that, skedaddle and come right over here to Sounds Like Autism and check us out.
Now, back to the show.
You're listening to the Launchcast, produced by Launchpad 516 Studios with me, your host, the LaunchDad himself, George Andriopoulos. I want to talk about mindfulness for a minute before we move on. I want to talk a little bit more about the book after that, and then we'll start wrapping up with the big three. Talk to me about mindfulness and your beliefs around mindfulness.
Man, mindfulness for me is just one of the primary components for the foundation that I've built to navigate my way through life at the moment now. So mindfulness, quite in its purest form, is essentially just an attention to the present moment. Yeah. And with as little judgment as possible, we're always going to have some judgment in any given moment. With as little attachment as possible, we're always going to be attached to some degree. But really just an attention to the present moment. And I like to simplify mindfulness into integrated mindfulness and dedicated mindfulness. So integrated is the practice of mindfulness integrated into doing something that you're ordinarily doing anyway. So you can practice mindfulness while you're listening to someone. You can practice mindfulness while you're sipping a glass of water or brushing your teeth or driving your car or playing sport, whatever it is that you're doing. And by the way, as you practice mindfulness in any of these things, it enhances the experience of that thing for you. It also improves your ability in that moment. So that's integrated. And then dedicated mindfulness is, just quite literally dedicating some time to sit. We call it meditation. And just to sit and notice what you can notice in the present moment. But what I'm finding now after, creating a habitual practice of mindfulness meditation, I sit every morning before I start my day. I meditate for 20 to 30 minutes. And I also have created habits around integrating mindfulness into certain parts of my waking hours, is that you can dissolve or dissolute any physiological experience that you previously would have been caught in. So just say you're experiencing an emotion, and then that emotion runs its natural course. You were angry and it served its purpose, but you're still angry. You're still stuck in anger, and you're identified with and kind of caught in this anger, the neural emotion looping, right? So you're thinking a thing and it's making you angry, and that's making you think that thing even more, and you're kind of stuck. The ability to go into a place of observation and just notice what you can notice means that you kind of remove yourself from being stuck, and it dissolves super quickly. So you can be the driver of your own physiological bus, right? You can go from angry to calm like that. You can go from frustrated to peaceful super quickly, from sad. So you can return to your place of equanimity, which is your calm centeredness, within seconds. And that to me is a bit of a superpower to be able to do that, especially for leaders, to bring it into the conversation of leadership. And I'm coaching my C-suite and executive leaders to be able to return to their place of calm centeredness. This is where they make their best decisions. This is where they listen most effectively. This is where they lead most effectively from this place. And you can get better at returning to that place, with your own will.
Talk for a minute about a little bit more about meditation and advice that you would give somebody that's not aware of the importance of meditation, especially in the practice of mindfulness. I'll tell a quick story. Meditation was never really my thing. It's something that it's been on my radar for a number of years, specifically transcendental meditation. I've been reading about it and wanted to try it for a number of years now. But way back, and I'll preface this by saying that one of the things I always work on about myself is not being judgmental. Because I used to tend to be a judgmental person, and I really try and always think first, like, stop judging, just do the thing, right? And so way back, I was very judgmental of that kind of stuff. To me, it was woo-woo bullshit, like, it didn't make sense, I don't need that, or whatever. And I had an experience, and I've talked about this before, I've had an experience where in my first TEDx Farmingdale that I was organizing in 2019, I had a lot of stuff going on, putting together this massive event, 24 talks on stage, 26 speakers, just so much to juggle. Work was busy, running my company, and then I had some stuff going on with my family, some health stuff, a couple of health scares, and I was just kind of rocked. And one of our speakers, TEDx Farmingdale, Scott Schmarin, the world famous Scott Schmarin, who's been on Oprah and the Howard Stern show, reached out to me because he kind of sensed something in me. And, I was trying to keep it private and said, no, I'm okay. And he goes, look, if you need some help, here are a couple of recordings. I think they'll be able to help you. And anyway, I did these recordings, and it was the first time that I had gone, you could call it hypnotized, but it was really just a meditative state. And it was so transformative for me in that moment where I was kind of like, not only was it tremendously helpful in that moment to sort of further my ability to be mindful in the moment and kind of take away some of the baggage, but I realized that meditative state, that hypnotic state, whatever that is, that's a state that I've been in other times and didn't know that I was in. That was kind of very eye-opening for me. And I'll tell people out there that have never meditated before, and this can be, I'm sure, different for everybody. You can speak on this better, but if you've ever just zoned out, you're staring out into nothing, and you kind of zone out, and you just kind of in that moment, you're zoned out, kind of double vision, you're super relaxed, and just you're there, but you're not. That's a meditative state. At least for me, that's what it is. And I was like, oh shit, this is what it is. This is easy, So, but it was huge for me because I already mindfulness, mindful thought had been on my radar, something I had been working on for years, but it wasn't until that moment where I knew what the meditative state was that I was kind of like, oh, okay, this is a big deal. This can help. So I'm sorry to kind of derail this, but talk for a minute about the importance of meditation in terms of being in mindful state.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, George, I have people say to me, I can't meditate. I've got way too busy a brain. My mind's way too busy. I'm like, welcome to being human. We've all got busy minds. The thoughts don't stop, right? They're incessant. They're bubbling along. Even the thoughts that are appearing in your mind can be an object of your observation. So you can even simply observe the thoughts the same way you can observe your breath, or you can observe, any sensations that you can feel. So anything you can notice in your conscious awareness can be an object of your observation. And that's mindfulness, simply noticing what you can notice. I think, you were talking about that state where you forget yourself, you might hear people say, I was lost in the moment, like they might have been, at a rock concert, and they got caught up in the euphoria of being on that dance floor with their favorite band playing, and they said, I was lost in the moment. Or playing sport when you're in the zone, and you're not even aware of self. You're just completely in the flow. This being lost in the moment, you're not actually lost. The only thing you've lost is your ego for a sec. right? You've lost your sense of identity. You're not identifying as the separate individual from the surroundings. So really, actually, what you are experiencing is the truth of the matter, which is that you are completely connected to everything around you. We're actually not separate, but
Yeah.
our ego would have us believe that we are separate. We experience the life as, we experience this life as I'm in the center of my universe. Everything's outside of me, even to the point of my body. I look at my hand and go, that's my hand, like I'm separate from it. Right. Wow. That's interesting that you have that idea. So when you are observing things without being identified with them, you're kind of stepping outside of ego, which is a spiritual experience for me anyway. It's a spiritual experience. And, it's a practice. It's not easy. People say, I can't meditate. And like every time you notice that you're lost in thought and then you come back to the practice of observing.
That was it.
That's the bicep curl.
Yeah.
Right. That's the workout. So you're noticing what you can notice, and then within a few seconds you're distracted and carried away with your thoughts again, and you go, oh, that's right, I'm meditating, and you come back to noticing again. That moment where you realized you were distracted is the workout.
Yeah.
And we do get better at it.
Yeah, and for anybody out there that's really wondering, I mean, there's so many ways to get into that state where you're thoughtful and you can kind of focus on that one thing, right? You mentioned sports. It's not something I ever even thought of, but yeah, as a guy that's obsessed with sports and loves playing, I do love when you hit that zone and you're kind of like just narrow focus, and I can kind of compare it even to work when I'm getting something done. I'm doing a project and I just kind of get in that zone. I got to get the thing done, and you're just narrowly focused and you can block things out. For me, working with Scott Schmarin, achieving meditation through hypnosis, and really just the first time, just so I can understand it, and now I can get into it if I need. I'm that guy that needs instructions, right? Like if I don't understand something, just give me the steps. I'm going to do them step by step. And with him, it was kind of like, okay, you must be, sit down in a chair. Do not lay down in bed. Make sure your feet are hanging off, not driving or anything. And, the breathing and focus on your feet, and it's moving through your legs. And it was all of a sudden, I remember when we had done it, my wife and I had a day, and we both listened together. And I remember her tapping me on the shoulder, because it was like a 22-minute exercise. She tapped me on the shoulder, and I was like, was I sleeping? And she goes, I mean, I don't think you were, but you weren't here, And I go, well, the last thing I remember hearing is XYZ. And I go, what happened after that? And she goes, oh my God, she couldn't remember either. Like, so she had gone into it. And I remember the next day getting ready for work, showering. I listened to it while I was showering so that I can hear what was said. And I go, I remember all of this, but I wasn't here. So it's just a weird kind of thing, but people should try it because it is transformative, big time. All right. I want to talk for a minute about your TEDx talk. How conscious communication can change your game. Now, this is super interesting because we just touched on this right before the interview, but Jem and I have both spoken at the same the same TEDx, and this was totally by mistake. We just realized this right before we got on the interview here at TEDx Derry Londonderry with Gary Doherty, my man, who's been actually on this podcast before. Great talk. I actually watched it this morning as I was feeding my 19-month-old daughter. Great talk and super interesting story. What was the impetus to doing a TEDx talk for you?
And look, how funny is that? Of all the TEDx studios in the world,
right?
And when I went to check you out before coming on here, I'm like, no, get out, TEDx Derry Londonderry. What are you doing? Like, what are the odds of that? And yeah, shout out to Gary.
And by the way, you're based in Australia, right?
Yeah.
He's based in Australia. I'm based in New York, and we both did a TEDx talk in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I know, right?
Amazing.
Crazy. People go to me, how on earth did you end up doing a TEDx talk in Northern Ireland? So it was the publisher of my book knows Gary and his wife. And, part of the deal of me using her as a publisher was that she'd get me a TEDx talk. So it ended up being with them. And, if it wasn't for the restrictions of the pandemic, I would have flown over there and used the excuse to go and meet them and do it over there. But we've been locked down here, especially in Victoria, in Australia, the state where I'm in. We've been locked down, more restrictively and longer than anyone else in the world, I think. And so I did it in lockdown, but I wanted to do it properly, and I wanted to honor the brand, the TED brand, and I wanted it to look as professional as possible. So I invested and, got a sign writer to make the sign properly, and hired like I was saying to you off air, hired a theater and a film crew, and did it as professionally as we could to make it look like we were in a theater. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's a great talk. We're going to put the link in the show notes for that, guys, as well as the link for Jem's book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. His website, hire Jem as a speaker, coach, whatever. We'll put it all in the show notes. So let's move on to the big three.
The big three from the Launchcast.
The big three. We do a shortened version for the Launchcast profiles here. So I'm going to do 2 questions here. Give me your top 3 quick, concise answers for each. Ready, Jem?
Okay, let's go.
All right. 3 traits of a thoughtful man.
The ability to pause, the ability to be honest about his emotions, and the ability to lean in and seek to understand.
3 favorite places you have ever traveled in the world.
Believe it or not, North Pakistan. The mountains up there are stunning and the people are beautiful. Indonesia and southern France.
Jem Fuller, ladies and gentlemen. Jem, thank you so much for being here. Incredible stuff today. We're going to, like I said, we'll put all the stuff in the show notes. You're going to be live a week from today, April 11th, 6 a.m., Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual places. I'm going to put you back in the green room for 2 minutes while I wrap up, and then we'll chat it up as we leave. All right. Thank you so much, Jem, for joining us today.
Awesome, George. Thank you so much.
Got it. All right, guys, another one. I'm loving these Launchcast leadership profiles. This is a great little format here, and we're going to continue this throughout the rest of season 3 and hopefully beyond. Like I said before, check us out every single Monday. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, all the usual places, 6 a.m. every single Monday. And remember to check out all of the great podcasts that come to you from Launchpad 516 Studios, and some really, really interesting ones coming up soon. Guys, see you later.
Launch sequence terminated.
Into the black hole.
The Launchcast is brought to you by Launchpad 516 Studios, produced by Fabrizio Fugazi and executive produced by George Andriopoulos. Marketing and PR by Media Convergence. Theme song by Tommy Lungberg. Music and sound effects are licensed through Epidemic Sound. The Launchcast is hosted with Podbean. Make sure to subscribe to this feed wherever podcasts are available, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts while you're at it, guys. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Pandora, TuneIn, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and everywhere else that podcasts are available. Follow me, George Andriopoulos, the host, at Launchpad CEO on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or follow the show at The Launchcast Show on Facebook and Instagram, or at Launchcast Show on Twitter. Visit our website, thelaunchcast.com, and make sure to follow all the great podcasts produced by Launchpad 516 Studios. We'll see you next time, guys.